I'm using this opportunity to not only talk about Circular 24, but also it's a year since the Bella Act was enacted or became an act. So I'm going to give a quick overview of what's happened since then. So this is what happened over the last year. On 20 December 2024, the president enacted the Bella Bill. So until then, the Bella Bill was still a bill, meaning a proposed act. Now it becomes an act and it's now in force. So whatever the act says can now be enforced by the state. Organizations such as AfriForum, however, threatened to challenge the Bella Act through court action. And to avoid that court action, the Minister of Education, Minister Gwarube, agreed to publish guidelines on the interpretation of the Bella Act to address the opposition to the act that they want to challenge by means of court action. So that avoided court action, and then the guidelines were published on the 12th of June 2025. So these guidelines explained how the act should be interpreted. So I'll go into those guidelines a bit later. And then on 11 December 2025, the Director General of the Department of Basic Education, Mr. Mweli, published Circular 24 to provide clarity on the registration requirements for home education. However, this circular was not distributed to the homeschooling organizations. The homeschooling organizations only learned about this during a meeting of the National Task Teams on Regulation on 24 February 2026. So those are the three major things that happened over the last year: the Bella Bill, the guidelines, and the circular. So we must not confuse this. The guidelines and the circular are different things. So let's proceed. So let's start with the Bella Act. Now, from a home education point of view, the major problems with the Bella Act is that they are vague and contradictory. So the Bella Act, for example, specifies curriculum and assessments requirements that are vague. It uses the term that the curriculum you must use must be, and I quote, predominantly comparable to the national curriculum. And when you do assessment, the education, the standard of education that a child receives must not be inferior in standard, quoting again. But there are no objective verifiable means to determine whether parents can comply with these requirements in the law. So in order to illustrate this, you can compare it with traffic laws. Now, traffic laws specifically specify things like maximum speeds, and motorists can objectively verifiable check whether they comply with the law or not. So if you're driving through past a traffic sign that says 60 and your speedometer says you are driving 80, then you know you are committing an offense. And that is how laws should work. But the Bella Act is the equivalent of a speed sign that says you may not drive too fast for cars that do not have a speedometer. Now, if parents cannot accurately determine if they comply with the law or not, registration is like throwing the dice. When you apply for registration, there's no ways that you can know whether this will be approved or not. Secondly, the Bella Act is also contradictory. It says that parents must, quote, make suitable educational resources available to support the learner's learning. But what if suitable educational resources are not comparable to the national curriculum? What if a curriculum that's not comparable is in the best interest of your child? So then you sit with choices. What must you choose? Must you meet the government curriculum or must you serve the best interest of your child? Laws that are vague and contradictory are difficult to enforce. Imagine your discussion with a traffic officer if he pulls you off and states that you drove too fast. In such a situation, you would encourage the officer to write a fine and look forward to an interesting discussion in court. The other problem, so we've got vague, contradictory, and now we've got unconstitutional. So we've got the registration requirements for home education are derived from section 29(3) of the Constitution. And that section lists requirements for independent education institutions. Now, such institutions are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of race. They must maintain standards that are not inferior to standards at comparable public institutions, and they must be registered with the state. So except for the requirement that it's obviously nonsensical to require homeschooling parents not to discriminate against their own children on the basis of race, they've maintained the other requirements for independent educational institution. But the problem is the Bella Act applies for constitutional to constitutional requirements that were written for institutions. They were not written for families. Section 51 of the Bella Act is therefore based on a misclassification of home education and therefore raises serious constitutional concerns. It's like requiring a bicycle owner to comply with legislation designed for trains. And then the last point is Bella Act gives officials excessive powers over children. So if a parent decides to choose home education, education officials now have the power to set aside your decision. If they decide, no, they think it's not in the best interest of your child, then they can override the parental decisions. The problem is education officials are not the upper guardian of children. The High Court is, but the Bella Act gives broad powers to such officials to set aside parental decisions. Secondly, education officials are not equipped to make decisions on complex, multifaceted matters such as the best interest for a specific individual child. In a research paper on this, advocate Megan Puchert states the following on how to determine the best interest of the children. She says, the South African High Courts are the upper guardian of all minors within their area of jurisdiction. The courts have very broad discretion to intervene in family matters, but generally the courts use their power sparingly and only intervene when there is good cause or on request or on the grounds of the welfare of the child. However, Section 51 gives officials that have no authority over children the power to make decisions that the actual upper guardian or the actual guardian, namely the parent, must make, and that the upper guardian of the children, like the court, is hesitant to make. So that in a nutshell are the main problems with the Bella Act. Then the minister issued guidelines on how the Bella Act should be interpreted. And there are a few positive things in those guidelines. The first thing it says, in line with applicable law, it is recommended that no arbitrary criteria should be relied on when determining whether education at home is in the best interest of the learner. That means when an official approves or declines your application, it must be based on objective, verifiable criteria, not arbitrary criteria. Secondly, it encourages officials to play a supportive role instead of prosecuting non-compliance. So they should not just say approved or not approved, and if you don't register, we'll prosecute you. The approach should be to help you to register. It also clarifies that home visits are not required, and also that parents do not need specific qualifications to choose home education, and there's no need for quarterly reports because some provinces do request quarterly reports. And fourthly, it clarifies that parents, this is important, if parents have concern about registration, it is the responsibility of the head of department to address these concerns. This was something that was not clear in the Act because the Act says there's compulsory school attendance, and if you do not attend school, then you are guilty of an offense, and you can be found guilty of an offense if you do not have a just cause. Now it says if you've got a concern about registration, they should take it seriously. It says specifically, it is recommended that the head of the relevant provincial education department should give due consideration to any concerns the parents of this learner may have regarding home education registration and take reasonable steps to rectify the matter, remove any obstacles the parent may have experience regarding home education registration and or assist the parents to register. So that is a good thing. But the negative things or the problematic things of the guidelines is it still entrenches the excessive powers of officials. It still agrees that officials have the authority to make decisions on your children without being an upper guardian. And then the last thing about the guidelines, it also makes it clear what the intention of Section 51 is. So we've asked the question many times, why do you need to register? Why is there Section 51? And intention is clear. The requirement in the SA Schools Act ensures that learners registered for home education may easily transition into mainstream schooling should the need for this arise. So it's designed for a failure condition. So you start home education for whatever reason, but if it fails and you want to move back to school, then they want to make it easy. So so the whole section has got nothing to do with home education. It's got all to do to make it easier to return to school. Or you can see it the other way around. It's make it difficult to leave the school system. Okay, that's the guidelines. Then we start with the circular. Okay, the first thing, a circular is not a law or regulation that is binding on the public. So you don't need to comply with the conditions of the circular. However, it is an instruction that is binding on officials, and they are likely to apply the interpretation contained in the circular when exercising their duties. That has got the implication that if parents do not agree with the interpretation provided by the circular, this will result in conflict between parents and official. And this has already happened in a situation of the KZN Education Department that declined an application on the basis of circulars S15 of 2022, which was a previous circular on home education, because officials viewed the education program chosen by the parent as an online school. The other thing we must take in mind, the guidance provided by Circular 24 is temporary in nature until regulations are published. However, there's nothing as permanent as a temporary measure when it comes to government. So this is probably going to influence the regulations to a large extent. So that is the status of the circular. Now, let's see what the circular actually does. So the first thing that the circular tries to clarify is the term predominantly comparable that we've got in the Bella Act. So it tries to clarify that. Now, if you're confused, if you look at the picture, you are entitled to be confused. Because that is actually what the circular does. So let's just work through this picture. On the left-hand side, you see the NCS, the National Curriculum Statement. That is a document that clearly describes subjects, grades, time that you allocate to each subject, how many assessments you must do, and the content and skills of each subject. It's very clearly described in the National Curriculum Statement. On the right-hand side, there are the diversity of home education approaches that homeschoolers use. And I'm just listing their traditional curriculum, classical education, unit studies, Montessori, unschooling. That is what homeschoolers do on the other side. And each of them are clearly defined in terms of their own parameters. Now, what they try to do in the circular is they try to define a way to compare the National Curriculum Statement with whatever homeschool curriculum you use. And they use this by means of the thing in the middle that they call broad learning fields. And they do list a few broad learning fields, but these are just some examples. It's not a comprehensive fixed list. So they define a context, a concept of broad learning fields, but it's not a clearly defined thing. Exactly how many broad learning fields are there, and what is included in there, what is excluded. So they create this vague term that they call broad learning fields. Then in order to do the comparison, you must have a mapping between, on the one hand, the well-defined National Curriculum Statements, and you must map this to the undefined broad learning fields. Now, the process to be used to do that mapping is not defined. So there's another question, man. What mapping process do you use to map the curriculum statement to the broad learning fields? And the same applies to the right-hand side. There's no description of how on earth do you map the home education approaches to the broad learning fields. So that's another undefined process. But let's say by hook and by crook, you do something like that. You define a number of broad learning fields and you can map the NCS and the home education process through that. How are you going to compare it? And what is predominantly comparable and what is not predominantly comparable? So that whole comparison, even if you're able to map it, the whole comparison process is undefined. So the only thing that the circular does it just creates more confusion because it requires, it just adds additional undefined processes and undefined terms. So I do not believe that this circular contributes anything to provide clarity. I think it provides more confusion. Okay, so other thing that the circular tries to do is it tries to create, give clarity on how do you, on assessment. Now, I've got some comments on that. As I've previously indicated, the registration requirements for home education are derived from the registration requirements for educational institutions given in the Constitution. Okay, so now let's look at that in terms of assessment. So one of the requirements for independent schools is that they must maintain a standard that is not inferior to standards at comparable public institutions. So private schools are required to maintain standards that are not inferior to standards at comparable public schools. But home learners must maintain a standard that is not inferior to the standard determined by the National Curriculum Statement. This means home learners and independent schools are treated differently. The one is measured against comparable public schools. The other one is measured against a theoretical concept like the standard of the curriculum. So although they treat home education as an independent school, they or view it as a type of independent school, they treat it differently when it comes to assessment. So that is a discriminatory treatment. Furthermore, the concept of a standard maintained by an independent school is a collective standard. If you talk about the standard at a certain school, it means what is the average achievement of all the children in the school. So it's a collective thing. So if the average at school A is higher than the average of school B, then you maintain a higher standard. You can measure that. But it does not mean that all the learners at school A perform better than all the learners at school B. It's a collective concept. And you cannot apply a collective concept to an individual home learner. That is another problem. Thirdly, the competence assessors are required to determine whether the standard of education is not inferior by considering a whole bunch of undefined concepts, such as meaningful learning, progression across fields, development of core competency, and broad alignment with phase-in expectations. These are all new terms that are introduced, but not defined, that must be considered by competent assessors. This makes the whole assessment process that must be executed by a competent assessor complex and susceptible to subjective judgment. Lastly, given recent surveys by the Pestalozzi Trust, it seems that there is insufficient administrative capacity to register home learners. So if provinces do not even have the capacity to register home learners, it's reasonable to assume that they do not have any process, or they do not have capacity to process assessments, because home educators are now required to submit the assessment reports, and then that must be received by the education departments, and then they must process it. They must do something with it. It's meaningless if you just need to send in stuff like the law requires, but they do not do something with it. Now, if they cannot even register a learner, it does not make sense to process the assessment reports of that learner, because you gotta capture those assessment reports against the registration number of the learner. But if you couldn't register it, doesn't make sense to send an assessment report. Further, it would not be reasonable to expect for parents to spend money on assessments if departments are not able to process the assessment. So before the departments can say, we are now ready to accept assessments and we will process it and give you feedback within a week, why should you send in assessments? Why must you spend money if they are not going to use what you've spent the money on? So it would be much more appropriate if the circular, if it wants to give clarity, that it gives clarity on something like only registered learners need to send assessment before only registered learners need to send in assessments if the department has announced that they are ready to process assessments. Otherwise, just like you deemed register if you don't receive a response within 60 days, they should say you are deemed to have passed all your assessments if you haven't sent in any assessments. So that's a comment on what the circular says about assessments. Then just the conclusion. Although the intention of the circular is to provide more clarity, I think there's reason to believe that it creates more confusion than clarity. The problem is, in the effort to implement this circular, officials will now make increasing use of subjective decision-making, and this will increase the conflict with parents. Furthermore, the circular is supposed to be temporary until regulations have been published. However, there's a famous saying of the economist Milton Friedman saying, nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program. For this reason, it can be expected that the content of the circular will find its way into the regulations and become permanent. This circular can therefore be used already to start preparing for when regulations are published for public comment. Now, some of you may say, nah, should we comment on these regulations? We've come up in our numbers and we've commented on the Bella Bill and they didn't listen to us. I just want to make this comments on this. So although the lots of comments and presentations made during the public hearings and so on did not make a significant difference to the words of the law, they have actually affected the will of government to enforce the law. And this is especially valid for home education. I've attended meetings in the early 2000s, and there the officials had confidently threatened us, saying, listen, if you don't register, we will execute criminal prosecution. The tone in the circular and also the guidelines is now, oh, no, we want to support you to register. So they've already started to change their tone. And I think that is the result of the pressure of the home education sector over the years. Firstly, the vague, contradictory and unconstitutional and subjective registration requirements will be the matter of concerns to many parents. The guideline now clarifies that the HOD is obligated to address these concerns. So if you submit a registration or you decide to refuse to register, and they come to you and you say, oh, you've got all these problems. And what I've presented today is things you can mention, vague, contradictory, etc. You must first sort out all these problems before I will register. Now that problem lies with the head of department. He's obligated in terms of the guidelines to address these concerns. So the problems that the legislators created by not addressing the concerns raised during the hearings are now the problem of the head of department. Okay. Lastly, so Cape Home Educators has presented alternative proposals all the way. So we've not only been obstructive all the time, we've also come up with positive alternative proposals. The first proposal that was submitted was, I was still then chairman of the Pestalozzi Trust, and in the hearings for the National Council of Provinces, we made a proposal of default approval. We said that education department should actually approve all applications, except if there's cause to believe that it's not in the best interest of the child. In such cases, the education department must approach the court to set aside the decision of parents. So this proposal of a way to interpret or change the Bella Act is based on the principle that the High Court is the upper guardian of the child. So you acknowledge officials are not don't have the authority to approve or decline applications for home education. So they must just assume that if the parent applies to register, that the parent knows best and just by default approve everything. And only if they get evidence that it's not in the best interest of the child, they must then request the court to set aside the decision of parents. So that is the proposal of default approval. In the middle of last year, after the publication of the guidelines, the Cape Home Educators made another proposal of voluntary registration. The proposal acknowledges that registration is of value to some parents. Parents that want to return learners to school, or parents that need state endorsement for their decision, especially in divorced families. And so it's helpful to have a paper that says, no, what you're doing is legal. So for those parents, registration is valuable. For the rest, it's of no use. It adds no value. So this proposal says voluntary registration. So not all parents need to register. Only those that have a need for it need to register, and the rest can just do what they see fit. And this addresses the issue of insufficient administrative capacity and the fact that it's very difficult to criminally prosecute home educators. And we submitted this proposal to the Western Cape Education Department, and then they referred us to the National Department. We gave a presentation to them. They sounded positive, but then they did nothing. And lastly, as part of our submissions to the National Task Team, we submitted a proposal of two-stream registration. So it proposes that if it's your intention to return your child to school, then you register your child in terms of Section 51 of the Act. Because the officials say that the purpose of Section 51 is to make it easy to return to school. So therefore you must use that thing for the purpose that it was designed for. So it's based on the concept of design intent. And this is confirmed in the guidelines, and in a recent meeting of Gauteng Education Department, they confirmed that is the intent of Section 51. However, if you do not intend to return your children to school, it does not make sense to register in terms of Section 51. Then you must register in terms of Section 4 of the Act, which gives the child exemption from compulsory school attendance without any curriculum or assessment requirements. So the two-stream registration proposal is based on the concept of design intent. Use Section 1 for what it's intended to. And that's